On this week's NESN Patriots podcast, we will discuss the Patriots' first preseason game against the Redskins. We will talk about players that we are going to watch in the second preseason game against the Eagles, and we will recap 3 weeks of practice. Hello and welcome to the NESN Patriots podcast. I'm Doug Kai, joined as always by Zach Cox. Zach, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you, Doug?
I'm doing well. So training camp is really kind of wrapping up here for the media, for the fans. It's always that kind of awkward period where you ask players like, oh, so training camp's wrapping up, and they're like, well, not really, because
they still have another 2 weeks of practice before the season starts.
Right, exactly. Nothing really changes for them other than the fact that they aren't practicing in front of the media and the fans. But before we get into training camp practices, let's first discuss the Patriots' first preseason game against the Washington Redskins. Definitely wasn't a hot start for the Patriots, and that was kind of concerning to see that the Patriots' first-team defense struggled so much against Colt McCoy and Washington's first or second-team offense, really.
Yeah, I think that was one of the bigger takeaways from the game, just that the Patriots, they didn't have their first team, or on offense, they had Brian Hoyer in over Tom Brady, so you kind of expected those early kind of struggles on offense. But on defense, they had basically pretty close to their number one defense. I mean, Trey Flowers was out and Devin McCourty didn't play, but other than that, it was pretty much the defense that you'll probably see in week one, and they really struggled. Stephon Gilmore really struggled, which was odd to see considering he's been probably the biggest standout, up to that point, had probably been the biggest defensive standout in practice for the Patriots. He had some issues out there. The Colt McCoy, who obviously is nobody's example of a quality NFL quarterback, was able to move the ball pretty much at will on the Patriots. And then once the kind of first teams came out and they started mixing things up, the Patriots were able to kind of come back and get back in the game. But obviously that's very far down the list of priorities in these preseason games.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter who wins the game. You're talking about a bunch of players who aren't going to make the roster at that point, who are the ones that I guess kind of brought the game back. It's the Ralph Webbs and even like Danny Etling, Devin Lucien, those types of guys. But I thought that some of the absences, or at least two of them, were notable. Jason McCourty did not play in the game, and Isaiah Wynn did not play in the game. Jason McCourty really didn't receive a ton of first-team reps in practice until really the last couple of days. So I think when Jason McCourty sat out of the preseason game, a lot of people were thinking, well, all right, his chances of making the roster have really slipped. Since then, we've seen him take some more first-team reps, so it's very unclear why McCourty didn't play. Maybe it's an injury issue. Maybe they were just trying to give other guys looks, but it was definitely odd that he didn't suit up. And Isaiah Wynn's another one where it's odd that you're not giving your top pick in the 2018 draft some reps at left tackle, left guard, right tackle, one of the positions he's going to play, because, I mean, he might have a big role this year. If a Patriots offensive lineman gets hurt, he will probably be the sixth guy to slide in there. It doesn't seem like he's going to earn a starting role, but by not playing him in that first preseason game, you're almost not letting him earn a starting role too, because if you were to beat out a guy like Joe Thuney or Marcus Cannon or Trent Brown, you'd think you want all of the snaps possible to watch him. But the Patriots sat him in the first preseason game. Maybe we'll see a lot of him on Thursday against the Eagles, but that was definitely a little bit head-scratching.
Yeah, it seems to me that the Patriots are entering this season with the expectation that Isaiah Wynn is going to be a backup to start his career, which is a little strange considering he was their first pick in this past year's draft. He was a 23rd overall. Normally, players in that position are at least kind of given the opportunity to compete for a starting role rather in their first season, especially since left tackle was the biggest question mark really coming into this season for the Patriots with Nate Solder gone. It seems like they're really just totally fine with Trent Brown sliding into that spot, and Trent Brown has played very well, but I expected to see a little bit more competition at that spot. We really haven't seen Isaiah Wynn slide in at first team left tackle at all this summer. We haven't seen him play any left guard after he played there a lot during the spring, and we've seen him slide over to the right side in recent weeks, or in recent days rather, which has been very strange because he really didn't play that much over there while he was at Georgia. And obviously the Patriots are dealing with Marcus Cannon has a little injury situation. We might not see him for the rest of the preseason. We might not see him even at the beginning of the regular season. So the Patriots might need a body to slide into that spot. But it's been strange that it's been Wynn working there. Who knows? Maybe we'll see some time there, either on the left side or on the right side against the Eagles this week. I would expect him to at least play in this game because he seems to be healthy. He's been a full participant in practice really all summer after coming back from that shoulder surgery. And then going back to Jason McCourty for a second, his case is probably the strangest of anybody on the Patriots right now. I've been really kind of baffled and confused with the way that they've used him, really going back to the spring when he didn't play at all in team drills, in organized team activities and minicamp, even though he appeared to at least be fully healthy considering he was on the field for all these practices and on the main field, not down working on that lower rehab field with some of the other injured players. Then he comes out, he's played very well so far in training camp from everything that we've seen. He hasn't made maybe as many kind of standout plays as some of those other cornerbacks, but he's been a steady, reliable, consistent player out there. He just hasn't really gotten many opportunities with the first team. Then you see him not play at all in this first preseason game. Then we come to practice this week and he's lining up with the first team. So I really have no idea what they're doing with Jason McCourty. And at this point, it seems like he almost has just as good of a chance to begin the season as the starting cornerback opposite Stephon Gilmore as he does getting cut before that final preseason game. It's so hard to get a read on his situation right now.
Yeah, it definitely is. I'll touch on McCourty again real quick. That is a good point because, so if Eric Rowe wins a starting job opposite Stephon Gilmore, it doesn't seem like Jason McCourty is going to become the slot cornerback. It would probably be Jonathan Jones or Duke Dawson, or it's really kind of going to be Patrick Chung. So if McCourty doesn't win a starting job, then you're talking about him being like the fourth or fifth cornerback on the team, which at that point, maybe you'd rather keep a younger body there. So we'll see what happens there, but it might be kind of a boom or bust preseason for Jason McCourty. And on Wynn, it is funny that, there's a chance he could start the season as the starting right tackle. If Marcus Cannon doesn't come back from his injury fast enough, then you're really talking about Wynn and Adrian Waddle competing for that right tackle job. And I would say that, when the Patriots drafted Isaiah Wynn, you expected him to be at either left tackle or left guard. Right tackle would have been like maybe the second to last position you'd expect him to play. Like you might even expect him to play right guard before right tackle, just because Marcus Cannon was already there. Isaiah Wynn had not played right tackle at Georgia. When I asked him this week about what it was like to switch, he said, if you're right-handed, have you ever tried writing with your left hand? Which, that seems like a very daunting process for Isaiah Wynn to learn that position, but he seems pretty comfortable so far from what we've seen from him.
And a quick point that you brought up earlier this week, when we saw Isaiah Wynn start taking snaps at right tackle, to me that indicated that Marcus Cannon's injury is probably maybe a little bit more significant than the team may have initially feared, considering they were working a new body in there and they weren't okay. Maybe they are okay with just having Adrian Waddle there in the meantime, but if this is a case where Marcus Cannon, who obviously missed the second half of last season, if he's going to be out for a significant period of time, maybe they want somebody else in there other than Adrian Waddle. But you brought this up. It's odd that they wouldn't put, and maybe they still will, but they haven't put Trent Brown back over there on the right side where he's played throughout his entire NFL career. And Trent Brown has even talked this summer about the difficulty of moving from right tackle to left tackle and then sliding Isaiah Wynn into the left side where he was basically dominant at Georgia. So very strange. A lot of moving parts on this offensive line right now. I think a lot of it's going to depend on how Marcus Cannon is health-wise as the season opens. If he's in there at right tackle, I think they're pretty well set with if you're going from Trent Brown, Joe Thuney, David Andrews, Shaq Mason, Marcus Cannon across the line. I think that's a pretty solid offensive line there with then Isaiah Wynn and Adrian Waddle and probably Cole Crossan or somebody like that as the backups. But if Marcus Cannon can't go and they have to shuffle things, then I don't know. You could see some moving parts in there.
Yeah, I think that if this was like a season-ending injury for Marcus Cannon, then you might see Trent Brown move over to the right side permanently. But if this is just going to be maybe a 1 or 2 week fix, then if you want Trent Brown to be your starting left tackle for the entire season, then you might as well keep him there throughout preseason. don't mess around with it there. So some of the standouts from that preseason game against the Redskins, we'll go through those pretty fast. I think Jeremy Hill was the biggest winner. We all kind of talked about that. He was running with explosiveness. He was running a little bit quicker than we've seen in the past. He was catching balls out of the backfield.
Playing some special teams too.
Played some special teams, had an impressive pass block as a pass blocker. Even on he had a 12-yard catch. He did a good job of chipping the guy at the end of the line before he ran his route. So it looked like he was doing all of the right things out there at running back. On the defensive side of the ball, I'm not sure if there was a true, standout like there was for Jeremy Hill, but some of the guys, or I guess it was Juwan Bentley, the rookie linebacker, he had 2 tackles for loss, 6 tackles. He brought some pressure in pass rush, looked pretty good in coverage. So I'd say those were probably the 2 big winners of the preseason. Was there any guys who you thought were kind of on the second level there?
I would agree that those were the 2 biggest standouts on either side of the ball for the Patriots. I liked what I saw from Derek Rivers in a smaller, I guess it wasn't a small sample size because he did play into the second half. He was a little raw still, as you would kind of expect for a guy who hasn't played a football game in almost a full year at this point, basically exactly a full year. But he had some good pass rush moves. He was called for a roughing the passer penalty, which probably wouldn't have drawn a penalty under the NFL's old rules. Even under the new ones, I still didn't really like the call, but he was bringing a lot of pressure all night, and I liked what I saw from him. He was starting in there with Trey Flowers out injured. And then on the offensive side, Devin Lucien, a guy you mentioned earlier, he's kind of he's not we're not really talking about Devin Lucien all that much because he's
other than me,
other than Doug, Doug is the captain of the Devin Lucien fan club right now. But when Devin Lucien came back right around the start of camp, he's a player who was a 7th round draft pick a couple years ago, has already had 2 summers in New England. Last year spent time on 4 different NFL practice squads around the league after the Patriots cut him following that final preseason game. He might have been a guy who would have stuck around with the Patriots if he didn't end up suffering an injury in that last preseason game last year. But when they brought him back, I don't think anybody really had many high hopes. He kind of replaced Cody Hollister as the low man on the totem pole, the roster long shot in that group. But he's played well so far. He's looked good in camp, and he was probably the Patriots' best receiving threat against the Redskins the other night. I think he had 4 catches for 70-something yards. Led the team in receiving yards when on a night where the quarterback play wasn't particularly good and a lot of the other receivers struggled. I mean, Chris Hogan had a couple drops. Riley McCarron had a drop. He was definitely the standout of that group. I still think he has a long way to go to make this team because he doesn't offer the potential kind of punt return, kick return ability of some of these other guys. But he's making the most of his opportunities so far.
Yeah, it's funny because heading into the preseason or heading into training camp, we thought this wide receiver group was stacked. You had Jordan Matthews, you had Kenny Britt. When they brought in Eric Decker, it was like, oh, wow, it got even more
Things
loaded.
have changed in a hurry.
Yeah, now this is really one of the weakest positions on the roster, I think. I mean, even a guy like Chris Hogan, who's going to be the number 1 receiver to start the season, he's struggling a little bit in practice. Eric Decker forgot how to catch a football, it seems like. Kenny Britt is still nursing that hamstring injury, has not been a full return to practice yet, even though he came off the PUP list. Braxton McCarron.
Basically.
Yeah, basically. Braxton Berrios and Riley McCarron, neither one of those guys have truly stood out yet.
Yeah, they've had some moments.
But it just like, when you're waiting to see that Wes Welker or Julian Edelman type, I know that takes time, but they just haven't really done enough. There's been drops. They've just kind of disappeared for periods. There's been muffed punts. Neither one of those guys has really emerged yet. So, yeah, it's funny. And then Philip Dorsett is a guy that we talked about a lot early in training camp, but that was kind of based on how he was used in practice, how he was always splitting off with Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski and Chris Hogan. It looked like the Patriots maybe had big plans for him, but the more you watch the guy in games and in practice, it's just like he doesn't do a whole lot, and you don't have a lot of confidence that he's going to gain separation or even come down with the ball when it's caught. And it's funny, if you take out all preconceived notions, I wrote this yesterday, you would look at Devin Lucien as being a guy who should make this team based on what he's done in practice and what he's done in training camp, but based on what he did in that preseason game. But because there is preconceived notions, because he did bounce around the league 5 times last year, because he's never made the Patriots in 2 other summers, you just assume he's not going to. But, I mean, if you're Tom Brady and you need a trustworthy wide receiver to start the season, and you're picking between Devin Lucien, Braxton Berrios, and Riley McCarron, you've got to pick Devin Lucien basically at this point. I know he doesn't have the potential that those other guys do, but he's just been a lot more trustworthy at coming down on the ball in practices.
Yep. And the fact that this is his third summer with the team now, so he does have, well, he doesn't have much NFL experience or really any NFL experience because he still hasn't played in his first regular season game. He's just been on practice squads for his entire career. He has caught a lot of passes from Tom Brady over the last couple of years, so there's definitely a little bit of that connection there, and we did see him working a little bit with Brady in 11-on-11 drills yesterday. So who knows? He's a guy who's going to have to really stand out as a receiver because he doesn't bring that special teams potential, or at least that returning potential. But he's like I said before, making the most of what he has right now.
Definitely, and he knows the offense, which is a big part of it too after 3 summers here. All right, let's quickly recap some of the practices that we've been watching recently. We kind of went through a lot of the stuff. Eric Decker has been having a lot of trouble with drops. Isaiah Wynn's been getting reps at right tackle. Jason McCourty's been receiving first-team reps at cornerback. Linebacker Juwan Bentley, who we mentioned earlier when we were talking about the game, has been receiving some first-team reps over Landon Roberts at middle linebacker, which I think is definitely notable when you're talking about roster construction or even just, the potential of this Patriots defense. I think Juwan Bentley has more potential at this point of his career than Landon Roberts does. And even the fact that Juwan Bentley was a 5th-round pick and Landon Roberts was a 6th-round pick, obviously just gauging by where they were drafted, the Patriots are higher on Bentley than they were at first on Landon Roberts. Anything else that stood out to you recently in practices?
I think you hit on most of the big highlights there. I'm interested to see, we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but I'm interested to see how this cornerback rotation, or not rotation, but this cornerback depth chart shakes out. Because for a long time, for really the first 2 weeks or so of training camp, it was Stephon Gilmore on one side, who's obviously locked into one of his 2 starting spots. No matter how poor he plays in the preseason, he's going to be one of the Patriots' most relied upon players going into this season. So he's in there, no questions asked. On the other side, it was Eric Rowe. We've seen that shake a little bit lately with Jason McCourty getting a little bit of time there. And then in the slot, which is really the Patriots' 6th defensive back because they use that 3 safety look so much, was Duke Dawson for a long time, their 2nd-round draft pick. Now, he's obviously a lock to make the team as a 2nd-round draft pick, but he was a player who didn't really stand out in practice at all, even though he was getting those increased reps with that first-team defense. And then recently, within the last week, you've seen some other guys kind of really succeed him and take over that spot. Jamal Wiltz, who's a guy that we don't really expect to make the team, was their top slot cornerback against the Redskins last week. And then Jonathan Jones, who recently came off the PUP list and who has played in that role in the past, has been has been sliding back into that role in the last few practices. So it's going to be an interesting situation with Dawson because, like I said, he's a guy that you have to have on this team. But if you could end up with a Cyrus Jones situation where a guy that they were really trying to push into one spot just doesn't really kind of pan out. Obviously, it's very early in his career. He's got plenty of time to even lock down this spot before the regular season starts. But it's interesting to see that the Patriots are already kind of starting to move away from him in that spot because he really hasn't performed.
I think part of it too is that Jonathan Jones came back from the injury. He came off PUP, so they slid him right in there. You mentioned Cyrus Jones. I think it would be interesting to give Cyrus Jones, when he's fully healthy, past that ACL recovery, to give him some reps in the slot because that was really supposed to be one of his strengths coming out of Alabama, was his work in the slot. So I'd like to see him get some inside reps with the first team in the preseason, in training camp, because if the Patriots enter the 2018 season and their cornerbacks are Stephon Gilmore and Eric Rowe on the outside and Jonathan Jones in the slot, I view that as a bit of a disappointment. Just because last year, Eric Rowe, up until the Super Bowl apparently, wasn't beating out Malcolm Butler for that starting cornerback spot, so that's a drop-off. And then Jonathan Jones was the Patriots slot cornerback for a long time last season, but then when Eric Rowe came back, Eric Rowe actually pushed Jonathan Jones out of the slot. So you're basically talking about last year's second option as an outside cornerback in Eric Rowe, and their second option in a slot cornerback in Jonathan Jones. So, unless those players have made major strides over the offseason, then that position, it definitely didn't improve because Malcolm Butler's gone, but it's taken a pretty significant step back from even what we thought it might be in 2018 because we thought Jason McCourty was going to be a starting cornerback. So I think in an ideal world, you still have Jason McCourty as the Patriots' outside cornerback, and either Duke Dawson, Cyrus Jones, Eric Rowe, or Jonathan Jones really battling it out for that slot cornerback job. There's some other guys, some young players like Ryan Lewis and J.C. Jackson, Jamal Wiltz, like you mentioned. Those guys are all still competing for roles as well, but I think the Patriots seem the highest on J.C. Jackson. He had some trouble with tackling in the Patriots preseason game, and if you're talking about him playing in the slot, that's a bad issue to have if you're a slot cornerback, because you're basically like a safety out there. You're almost playing like a linebacker as a slot cornerback, so you need to be a really good tackler both on slot wide receivers, on outside wide receivers who are running in, and on running backs who are coming out of the backfield.
Definitely, that's was the biggest takeaway I saw from Jackson's first game, because he's a guy who's impressed us a lot in practice and coverage, but yeah, both on special teams and on defense. He had 2 or 3 missed tackles out there. He had some plays where he just didn't really wrap the guy up correctly. And like you said, if you're in the slot, I mean, Logan Ryan played there a ton. He's a great tackler. Yeah. Malcolm Butler saw some time there. He's a great tackler. So guys like that, that's a spot where you need to be able to bring down running backs, bring down receivers, bring down tight ends. So if you can't tackle, it's pretty hard to play the slot.
Absolutely. All right, let's get into this week's game against the Eagles. Kind of a Super Bowl 52 rematch. That's the most boring storyline in the world to me, since it's a preseason game and it does not matter. So we'll just move past that. But just some guys that were watching this game, it seems like Tom Brady is going to play. So I think that makes everything on offense that much more important and notable, because you've actually got the guy who matters at quarterback. So the receivers he's throwing to, the running backs he's working with, the offensive line that's protecting him, everything gets notched up because he's going to be in the game. So I think that everything on offense and every set that they run and every personnel package that they put out there just matters a little bit more.
Agreed. I mean, when Brian Hoyer's out there, like we said earlier, you kind of can't really take anything away from the offense. So
right.
The only thing we could draw from the offense last week really was that Jeremy Hill played well. The passing game, it's basically impossible to properly evaluate these wide receivers and even some of the offensive linemen. I mean, Ladrian Waddle gave up a sack, but that was a lot on Brian Hoyer because he didn't move in the pocket, didn't kind of see the pressure coming and get out of the way. So when the quarterback quality drops so drastically between Brady and Hoyer, it's really hard to kind of properly evaluate all these other guys. Brady being in there, I think, is going to be it's going to be the kind of storyline to watch in this game. Because we have seen Brady struggle a little bit in training camp. He's had days,
especially yesterday.
Yep, especially yesterday. That was probably his worst day of the summer. 15 of 28 with an interception. There are a lot of drops out there, sloppy conditions, but we haven't seen Brady be as dominant this summer as he has been in previous years. He's had moments like that. He's had entire practices like that. But how will being away for most of the spring translate into actual game situations? How will he look out on this field after in his first game since Super Bowl 52 with a lot of new faces around him? So I'm definitely very interested to see how he performs in this game. He's not going to play for very long, I would assume. I mean, last year in the second preseason game, he played 2 series. I'm expecting somewhere between that and a quarter. I don't think he'll play a full half. That probably won't come until next week in week 3 of the preseason. But yeah, definitely very interested to see how Tom Brady looks out there, especially with the reports that he was dealing with a sore back last week too. So.
Yeah. Protecting him just matters all the more. I think
Absolutely.
that, I think the wide receivers are definitely a position to watch, because that area of the offense, I don't know what I'm saying, I'm tired, is just been struggling so much. So we'll see if Eric Decker remembers how to catch a football during a preseason game. On defense, it's a lot of the same positions that we've already kind of discussed. Cornerback, we'll see who's in that first team defense. Seems like it could be Jason McCourty this week. I'd even be interested to see them put Eric Rowe and Jason McCourty out there and, just kind of give Stephon Gilmore some time off, because we know he's going to be a starting cornerback. We just have to see who they're going to decide is the other starting cornerback in there, who's going to be the slot guy in there. Safety, I think Patriots fans would like to see Eddie Pleasant, right?
Eddie Pleasant.
Yep. Start to emerge a little bit over Jordan Richards. I think that a lot of Patriots fans don't want to see Jordan Richards make the team again this year. And, just some of the guys on the defensive line, whether it's Keontae Davis, who seems to be battling for a roster spot, or Derek Rivers, who you mentioned earlier, Dietrich Wise, just to see a little bit more production out of those, first team or second team defensive ends, because the Patriots really started piling up the sacks late in the game when Eric Lee and Trent Harris were getting sacks on the quarterback.
Yeah, there are a lot of those edge players. most of the ones that you mentioned, they're all kind of fighting for roster spots. Nobody on that list is really guaranteed a spot except for Derek Rivers in there. So it's going to be Eric Lee, Keontae Davis, Geno Grissom in there, who had one of the plays of the game against the Redskins with the fumble recovery. Who am I missing in there?
Trent Harris.
Trent Harris, who forced that fumble that Geno Grissom recovered. Those guys are all battling for roster spots, so it's going to be very interesting. I know a lot of people tune out in the third and fourth quarter of these preseason games, rightfully so. Sometimes the football gets a little sloppy, but there will definitely be a lot of interesting players to watch late in that game.
I have a nitpick actually. I think that the fumble recoverer gets way too much press. And the forced fumbler never gets enough. The forced fumble is really the turnover. The guy recovering it, I mean, he was around the ball, and he should get credit for picking it up and doing whatever he does after he gets it. But the reason the turnover is happening is because of the forced fumbler, which in this case was Trent Harris.
There's some math to it. It depends on how long the fumble return was. I think if it's like 20 yards or less, then the fumble causer gets the press. If it's 20 yards or more, then it's a fat guy running with the football, and everybody loves a fat guy running with the football.
Absolutely. And on that Geno Grissom return, Ryan Lewis kind of blew it. It probably would have been a touchdown if Ryan Lewis had his head more on a swivel and had blocked the receiver who eventually tackled Geno Grissom. But it is Tuesday. We're about to talk to Bill Belichick. We're going to watch our final training camp practice of the summer. So if something crazy happens during that, then you'll probably hear from us before this podcast even started. But if nothing crazy happens, then I think that we're pretty content with everything that we've said about basically all of the training camp practices that we've watched, first preseason game that we watched, and we'll definitely be back here after the second preseason game because I'm sure that a lot of other things will change after that as well.
Absolutely.
All right, so thanks for listening to the NESN Patriots podcast. Follow me, Doug, on Twitter at DougKide. Follow Zach on Twitter at ZachCoxNESN. And go to NESN.com for all of your Patriots coverage.